I'm Frank Leathers. I grew up in Leon County, 16 miles southeast of Centerville in Leon County. But now, out in a little community called Vice Store. But I went to Centerville and got me a city girl to marry. Linda Floyd Leathers now. For 59 years. Been pretty good time. Anyway, I attended high school and a country school, then I actually came down here and finished high school at Huntsville because my dad wanted me to get a little stronger science and math courses, so I actually came to Huntsville my senior year, finished. I grew up on a ranch, loved the ranch, followed my dad. And after finishing high school, of course, I went into service. April 27th, 1944. Went to San Antonio for orientation, learned to do close order drill, and a few field projects. And then we were shipped out to training camp. And I didn't want to go to the Pacific. I'm not a water bug or the swamps or all the pictures coming out of the South Pacific. Anyway, when I woke up on that troop train, headed east out of Dallas, I said, ooh, thank you, Lord, thank you. Maybe I'm going to do my training in the east. So we stopped at Little Rock, Camp Joseph T. Robinson, which was a replacement camp, and of course, that's what I was being trained for. Of course, by that time, we had lost a good many troops. I was first trained in the Transportation Corps. Man, I became an expert truck driver. I could drive a truck, of course, back on the farm, but those 2.5-ton trucks in the Ozarks, you couldn't use the brakes. You had to gear down. They wouldn't allow you to use the brakes. Anyway, but after D-Day, June the 6th, 44, they lost so many men, they transferred us into the regular infantry. They pulled units out of the Air Force, engineers, and other groups. So we had all kinds of guys training with us. At Joseph T. we had good officers. One young man, the first lieutenant I remember, boy, he was a good lecturer. And we had some rich experiences in that training, 13 weeks of it.
You recall one in particular that you might want to relate?
I don't know the names of the officers. But they'd had, out in the woods, they had stands built, kind of grandstand type things, and after we'd do a field project or something, we'd get up in those stands and hear a lecture. And then some of the night projects, I remember one night project, they wanted to show us how important it was when they ordered blackout, how important it was to have a blackout. So they had a guy about, I suppose maybe a mile, half a mile down the range. He lit a cigarette. And you would thought, at dark night, you thought he was standing there 10 feet from you. So that was emphasizing how important it was. But in the maneuvers and training, I lucked out in that the captain tapped me to be his valet. I was his leg boy. So I missed some of the tough spots, except I didn't miss that march, 25 march back to camp when we completed our field training. From there, I got a delay en route home before I shipped overseas. I came home for a few days. At that time, my cousin Bob Leathers died, and he was like a brother to my dad. So I remember going to that funeral while I was home, and I remember they sang the old Rugged Cross. And his daughter, a very close friend, still living. She married an Army person. She's in that Army building down in San Antonio there, and her husband was in part of the CIA. She was trying to give me some of his civilian clothes. He had a closet full of civilian clothes because a lot of his work, he posed as a civilian and working with foreign governments. Anyway, the order came for me to report to Camp Meade in Maryland. My uncle is in World War I, and there's his helmet. And he lived in Crockett. Dad and Mother carried me over there to catch a train at midnight to go to Fort Meade, Maryland. And my uncle's last comment was, "Frank, take care of number one. Take care of number one." Well, he gives credit for taking care of number one. He almost died because, you see, in World War I, so many died with flu and pneumonia and all, and they gave him up for death, and he kind of self-doctored himself and did all right, I think. Anyway, we went from Fort Meade, and the thing that impressed me about Fort Meade, the first time I'd encountered, even though in Little and Camp Joseph T, we had taps and all, but the thing that I remember about Fort Meade, when they blew taps, at the end of the day, everything stopped. Everything. The guys on the streets and all, they stopped those vehicles, got out and saluted and stood there. That was impressive. I've always said taps is the GI's prayer.
That's great. That's the way it ought to be.
Then from there, I was shipped up to Camp Kilmer, and from there on to the New York Harbor. And probably, at the end of, I used to remember what street it was, but here the Queen Elizabeth was docked there, and boy, we were excited. They thought we could be sailing on the Queen Elizabeth. We boarded the next ship to them, an old Esperin Bay, the rustiest thing the English had to help us out.
Yeah, that sounds more like it.
So when we left New York, we discovered we was in a convoy that was quite impressive. I mean, as far as you could see, there were ships. And the destroyers were circling in and out, watching for, of course, the German subs. As you know, they were quite treacherous along our coast. Anyway, we were on that ship, and we were assigned the dining room is where we stayed, slept on the tables, under the tables, and so forth. The food, absolutely horrible. They'd take good American food. I don't know what they did with it. And leave it to me, I was assigned to go to the galley to get the food for our crew. And they would darn near kill me when I'd get back and I'd have some of that slop. One time they just took a bite and sent me back to the bite. They said, "You go back, and if you can't give it back to them, just dump it in the floor." I said, "I'm not about to do that. They'll throw me overboard." Anyway, it was kind of sad, but thanks to the National Biscuit Company, we had a PX on there, and we all had a little money still, and that's what kept us alive with those peanut butter crackers that the National Biscuit Company produced. So I'll always be grateful to the National Biscuit Company.
Let me stop just a minute. Charlie and Barney, y'all are welcome to converse with him during his talk here if y'all want to.
I think he's doing fine.
So I say, if y'all want to make any comments or ask questions, go right ahead, because that's what we're for, you know.
It's very good.
Get you guys on video, so we'll see who will be possibly talking to us here. Charlie and Barney.
I didn't come here to get my picture taken.
Well, too late. You're already on the FBI now.
Anyway, we were sailing to Liverpool, England, and 13 days and nights. But I felt like we were pretty lucky. We looked across the water, and those poor guys on those what we call victory ships, they rode high out of the water, and they were rough. But those guys would spend a day on deck, a day in the hold. They had to move, shift back and forth. At least we didn't have to do that. Anyway, landed in Liverpool, unloaded, took a train down to Warminster Barracks, one of the English ports. I understand that's where Montgomery trained his tankers and so forth. Then later to Southampton and boarded an Indian ship from India, and cooks put a big old container of tea out on the deck. That was the best tea I ever had in my life. I don't know what was different about it, but it was delicious tea. We thoroughly enjoyed that. And of course, when we got off the coast of Omaha Beach, we had to go down the nets to a landing craft, and then we'll put ashore. At least it's closer to get with the landing craft. You know how those things work. They drop an anchor back here, and then had a winch to pull them back off the beach after they had unloaded their cargo, and then walked up the hill. And we were right in the middle of the hedgerows. Lucky I didn't have to fight in the hedgerows. You know those hedgerows, each little plot of land, over the years, the wind had carried the dust from that field into the brush at the fence line, and it had built up, and then brush had grown in it, and they were up 3, 4, 5 feet high. And what would happen when a tank would roll up on that, they could hit the underbelly. Funny, you might have read this in the news. I remember General Eisenhower complimented a GI who developed a blade to put on the front of those tanks to just scoop that thing out so they could go on, and that they could move. But that hedgerow fighting, I talked to some of the guys that went through that. That was awful. That was worse than house-to-house fighting in the cities. But from there, we boarded what we call a 40 and 8. The French boxcars would take 8 horses or 40 men. They put 40 men on one of those boxcars, and here we started rolling across France. And of course, Patton and his tankers had already spearheaded, and they had gotten, and our unit had just crossed the Moselle when we joined them. And there again, I felt very lucky because, boy, the casualties in crossing the Moselle River was very heavy. Our mission was then to close the gap around Metz, which was a well-fortified city in eastern France. My first attack was on the little town of Saint-Avold. But my first night on the line, we went up to this hill and dug in, and a boy that I really was with off and on all the way through the end of the war and still remained friends till he died just a few months ago, Henry J. Worst from Chicago. We dug in together, and the way, if you're familiar with the way the foxholes, 2 men dug in, and they dug a seat at the end, so when you could sit down at the end of your hole and your head was just over the edge where you could look out and see if the enemy was coming. Well, in the night, before that, the kitchen crew brought food up. They brought the chow up down to the bottom of the hill, and we went down and with our canteens and had the chow. But Worth was a big coffee drinker. I brought this canteen. What that clown did, he poured his water out and filled it up with coffee. Well, later in the night, the sergeant tapped him to go on patrol. He had I don't know what you call it, premonition. The sergeant would not settle down at night unless he knew what was out ahead of him. And he'd go out and take somebody with him and kind of scour around to see what was out in front of him. Well, he came along and tapped Henry to go with him. So he took my canteen and left his. So I got thirsty. He woke me up because the rule was you guard an hour, slept an hour, and then you're on duty. So what you do is punch the other guy, and it's your time to serve on guard duty. Well, I turned that thing up, and I detest coffee because when I was a kid, I loved coffee. And Mother discovered that, and that's what she gave me castor oil in. Oh, I cannot stand coffee. But there I was, I took a big swig of it. I never let him forget that the rest of our lives.
Good.
Anyway, we moved out from that and then down toward this little town. Well, we lined up. They said, we're going to take this little town. So we eased in along there was a timber line, so we lined up along this timber line. And the lieutenant was to give a motion for us to come out of there, firing at anything that moved or anything we wanted to. Well, I had never fired this rifle that I had been issued. To give you an idea what a powerful booger that M1 is, I lifted it and just sighted it at a shutter on a building. You know, they open those shutters back from windows, they had shutters. It knocked that shutter completely off that whole wall. I said, man. Well, I'd been on the firing range, of course, in training, and you'd see the little hole through the canopy or something, but man. Anyway, we took them by surprise, and what they had done in those little towns, they had trees along the drive, along the road coming in, and what they had done is set charges on those. What they'd do is blow those charges, and the trees would lap there, and it would stop the tanks. Well, we saw the guy on his tricycle going up there to set off the charge, but he didn't make it. So we beat him to that because we knocked him off that bicycle. And anyway, that night we dug out on the hill, and man, it was cold. So I went hustling for something to try to stay a little warm, and I came up with a German overcoat. So my first night in that area was on a German overcoat. So we moved out from that and moved on towards the Rhine. And the Navy was to put us across the Rhine. They were going to bring boats up and bring us across the Rhine. So we got there and went down to the water's edge, and they weren't there. It was already night. So we had to go back, waited for them. Nobody wanted to take the river with the promise of Navy help, so we waited for the Navy. So then we go back it was about 2 o'clock in the morning when we finally, but luckily somebody had scouted out the other side. There the trenches and the foxholes were for the Germans, but they were not there. Well, that would have been a slaughter, us on that water. Anyway, we crossed the Rhine without a shot. They'd already crossed it up north. You know the story about how they went across that rail bridge. And so they had crossed it both north and south of us. So the pincher was on. So anyway, that was a lucky break there. Then we moved on to Wiesbaden, which was kind of a western city. It was like the United States. You felt like you were in a United States city in Wiesbaden. Well, they were afraid that the Germans would blow their utilities, so our unit was assigned a telephone exchange to guard. And I remember being on guard duty there, and a guy rode up his bicycle and handed me a little 22 gauge pistol. I gave that, I forgot now, gave it to one of the sergeant named Gaynor, I remember. Because later when I got the Luger, he didn't have a gun, so I gave him that pistol. Later in that night, we had set up a roadblock in the hotel district. And later that night, we were on guard and we heard these hobnail shoes on cobblestone. Well, we got ready for a little action. Well, it was kind of a starlight night, and as they got closer to it, there 2 officers were with a white flag. They were easing out of their unit and surrendered, which we were very pleased with that. At the hotel, this Henry Wurst was quite a joker anyway. He announced to the family that ran the hotel, there's a man and his wife and their daughter was there, and the HUD was...
Let's cut, let's just hold it. Let's just put it on hold here for a minute.
Okay. We were quartered in a hotel, believe it or not. One of the nice hotel downtown in Wiesbaden, right across the street from a beautiful park. Well, Worse always kind of a joker. He announced to the family, and the family ran the hotel, the man and his wife, and their daughter was there. The daughter's husband was in the service, and they had a little girl. He announced that Eisenhower was going to come and establish his headquarters in that hotel. And that poor young lady went berserk. She became hysterical. Do you know we learned later that Eisenhower did establish his headquarters in that hotel? Well, we had no way of knowing that. That was just
amazing.
That was just a kind of popping off deal. Well, we left after the engineers built the pontoon bridge across the Rhine, and they could roll in with the trucks and tanks and all that. We loaded on trucks, and they had cleared a good bit of the path north to Kassel, pretty big city up in northern part of Germany. Well, we got there. We were ordered then at night, we were ordered to go to the north side and close the highway leading out of Kassel to stop the exit out of Kassel. Well, our platoon plus the 4th platoon, which had, 4th platoon had a mortar and machine gun. So we move out the edge of town and start up toward that little community, which was the place where we were to go to set up roadblock to stop. Well, first thing we did was encounter a German artillery encampment. I mean, they had an artillery piece. Well, we thought we'd have a little scrimmage there, but what we did, they didn't bother us. We didn't bother them. We saw no advantage in us having a big old German 88 in our command or something. So we eased around them and went on. Well, we got out in the open country, and whoever was supposed to be directing us said he was confused and lost. He wasn't sure. So believe it or not, he went to a German home, woke the people up, and asked to show him on the map where we were. And the young lady there, you know, the men in Germany all in the world, and the women they would just love to see a man of any kind almost. And so she said, not only I'll show you, I'll go with you. Well, I was point man. So here she came marching off down the little old trail there. See, we were out in the farmland, so this was a kind of a turn road trail. And I had to hold her back, and I finally said, hey, she may be leading us into a trap. So, but she had promised to help us if we'd send an American soldier back to sleep with her. But didn't anybody want to volunteer? So, as we moved towards the town, being point man, I didn't know what, I was easing my way along. And a guy named Kuzmak from Washington and I took turns when we were asked to point an attack. But that happened to be my time that night. So anyway, I dropped off in this ditch of a thing and easing along, and the first thing I heard was somebody saying, come see out with the hands aloof, come see out with the hands aloof. And I looked around, and this Henry Worth was up on that bank with his rifle pointed at me, and I said, Hank, it's Frank, cut it out. Oh, he was so embarrassed. Anyway, we moved along, and here's the railroad track. Well, when we got that railroad track, all of a sudden I heard this noise that sounded just like a German soldier walking on with a hobnail shoes on a cobblestone. To me, it sounded that way. Anyway, I just froze. And in a few minutes, I discovered it was water dripping down from that overpass and hitting something underneath. I don't know what it was. Well, we eased on that. We had just passed the Germans' foxholes. They were dug in, and there they had left their foxholes. It was cold and all that they had discovered. Law said, nothing, it's quiet, nothing's going to happen. So apparently they decided, that's speculation as to why they weren't in the holes. They had gone back and got in a big house thing there just next to this street where we were to lock. Now, I don't know the explanation, but part of us broke into the house on the right of that little farmland, and the rest of them went into the house on the left. Later tonight, somebody got concerned and they put a guard across the street in front of us, and there he was walking back and forth with hobnail shoes on that cobblestone. I don't know why that sound used to just send chills up my back, but it did. There we were.
It's a sound that the enemy is near. You know,
Yeah,
if you can hear that,
He's
pretty
very,
close.
he's very near.
Yeah.
So anyway, as daylight came, this is hard to believe, but the German officer brought his men out and lined them up right in front of us. Right in front of us there. Now, why didn't I'm up in a window right above. This house we're in kind of had looked like about half story in the ground, and then we were up about 6 feet. Why didn't I offer, give them an opportunity to surrender? But when he checked his list, and then they knew something was up. They got in a crouch position and started up the lane on the other side. And when the other guys discovered them, they opened fire. Of course, when they opened fire, we did. And it was just an absolute slaughter there in the street. It was just pitiful. But it has haunted me for years why I didn't offer, or someone in our group didn't offer opportunity for them to surrender and not have that bloodbath. But you see, we couldn't see them all. So when you think about it, it may have been a disaster for us. But anyway, that's what happened. And of course, some of them what weren't killed were wounded, and our medics were a little afraid to get out right then. But later in the morning, I suppose it was close to noon or afterwards, that our unit broke through to us, coming through it. So then our medic could go attend those that were wounded. It was kind of sad. We moved out for that, and I might be missing something right in here. After many years, I don't know. But shortly after that, I've missed the balls here, so I need to back up, and because this was towards the end of I need to back up and talk about the balls a little bit.
Okay.
When we left, I'll tell you, we went down to the Rhine, but actually before that, we were left this St. of Old after my first attack. We went south. Then I know, in France, going across France is wet and sloppy it was. A lot of guys got trench foot because they didn't take care of their feet. I kept 2 pair of socks on my belt, and at night I would take my boots off and rub my feet and put on a dry pair of socks because they'd dry on my belt line, and I tried to take care of my feet. But those poor guys that fooled around and got trench foot, and their feet would swell up, so it's just pitiful. But anyway, let me kind of recall just where we were and all, but moved on to down south, and then In France, we slept in the fields. But when we got into Germany, we slept in houses. And we were in Germany, or in Sac-Lorraine, South Sac-Lorraine, I don't know just how that's pronounced, but anyway, a couple of us had found us a hay barn, and we had bird down in that hay, and I tell you, we were ready for a good night's rest. About 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock so, the sergeant came into that barn and he said, "Let me have your attention," in a loud voice. "The Germans have broken through. Get ready. We're moving out in 5-10 minutes." Well, he explained that they'd broken through the line and were launching quite a drive up in Luxembourg. We loaded on trucks. We were about 100 miles south, I think, something like that. Anyway, we rolled all night, stopped somewhere, I know, at a school, at least stretched our leg and got a drink of water and maybe took a nap, loaded back, and we got close to we were going up in on the south flank of the Bulge. No one knew exactly where it was. But the officer in charge stopped the convoy when he felt like we were getting close and said to get off and walk, because I don't lose my trucks. So there we were. We got off and marched all day, single file down each side of the road. At nighttime, just between sundown and dark, you might say, we arrived at this edge of the timber, and the order said, "Get ready to attack." There we were, been walking all day, tired, and now the tankers and TD people, they would fight a battle if they were just coupled or confronted with just other tanks, or TD. But if they were confronting a tank unit that had infantry along, they wanted infantry along. And this group, they wanted infantry along, because they worried about, the Germans had something like our bazooka, and they could blow a tank up. And anyway, just as we moved through that kind of a line of trees there, those tanks and all pulled out, and the order was to attack. So we went down the hill, and just as we got down into the valley, the Germans on the hill on the other side opened up on us. To this day, I don't understand, but I'm living, so I can't be critical. I don't understand why we didn't push on through, because it appeared to be a small force. They had a little anti-tank gun, but they pinned us down, or we just stopped. And of course, the tankers went to begging us to dig in around them. So anyway, down there had little hedgerows, about like this, dividing the line, dividing the land line. So I started digging by one of those. Now the big old farmhouse off to the left, late in the night, it was cold. Some of the guys eased off and went over and got in that barn at that farmhouse. It was a big farmhouse. Well, I didn't buy into that, but I kept digging. And sure enough, when daylight came, they opened up on us again. And then, of course, they opened up on that barn and house and killed a lot of guys. And some of our guys had gone over there. I know one named Miccarelli. And I looked up and he was crawling back our way. And I hollered to him, "Get the water can and come get in the hole with me. I got a big hole." That was a mistake. He brought the water can. Of course, the water was frozen. I don't know what I was going to do with the frozen water, but he set it on top of the dirt that I dug out. Now you can imagine where that put that can.
Target.
And they zeroed in and hit it. They hit it. Now, why, I don't know. But shrapnel practically, we both had heavy coats on. Shrapnel practically cut the overcoat off of both of us. Not a scratch, not a scratch. I don't understand it, but that's what happened. Anyway, later that day, I couldn't believe it. We got an order to withdraw. to scatter and run for it. Well, the tankers that had run from their tanks, there was a tank up on the hillside. And a tanker ran and started that tank and backed it over that hill, and them firing at him all the time because he had his front towards the enemy, and of course he had that armor on the front, so they didn't hurt him with that little, I don't know what size tank it was. But two guys were running, and they shot between and killed both of them. And the guy with me walking along, and we'd run a little bit and stop. A shell hit between us, and a shrapnel hit him. But back when we first arrived at the Bulls, the little town that where we were to report to or to stop, well, we would dig in on that hill, and that's when the ground was frozen about 6 inches. And can you imagine digging in 6 inches of frozen ground with that? Well, finally somebody went back and came up, I don't know where they got them, but they came back with some picks that did pretty good in breaking through and getting it. And that's where they shelled us. You start digging with that, and the sparks start flying. And of course, they started shelling us because they had a target. And I got hit with some shrapnel in my shoulder, and that's what I got the Purple Heart for.
That sounds like a bad day.
Yeah, well, there weren't many good days, but that was especially bad one. I'm kind of jumping around here. I thought about it, and I thought I had all the sequence pretty well lined up. Let me back up.
It's okay because I'm going to edit. The tape will be edited.
Okay.
I can cut and paste any way I want it.
This little town where I said we went and where we're digging in on the hill, they had us zeroed in, and of course there was a little brewery in this place. And in a brewery they have big vats, some way to treat the corn or the wheat or barley, whatever it is. We built a fire in that, and that's the way we'd take turns going in and kind of thawing out. Well, the German knew what we're doing. They had an artillery piece called a Screaming Mimi, and we heard that blooming thing cut loose. And sure enough, they put one right through the roof in there. And that shell was about that big around and about that long. But thanks to the Polish displaced persons that the Germans had working in their artillery plant, the fuse wasn't set, so it didn't go off.
Oh, my.
So my story is one of luck. Yeah, but you can imagine that thing had gone off, that'd been the end of the whole thing. While we were there, one of my good friends stood in a doorway too long, and the sniper got him.
Got him.
That's a perfect silhouette for a perfect frame. And he knew better than that, but he just kind of let things lapse. He left a wife and a little girl out in Idaho. So sad. We moved from there along the flank. We're still trying to mooch towards Bastogne, which the 101st had come and was holding Bastogne.